The woman stood still, her cheek stinging lightly, but her face showed no anger. Around her, the whispers in the crowd grew louder. People recorded, shook their heads, and exchanged glances. Some thought she was helpless. Others thought she was brave for staying calm. Yet none of them truly understood who she was. Her name was Naomi Carter. To the outside world that day, she was just a stranger on the street, dressed casually, blending into the crowd. But in truth, Naomi was not an ordinary woman at all. She was one of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. military, a commander in the Delta Force. It was a role so secretive that even many soldiers had never met her. She had spent years in silence, working behind the scenes, leading missions that most people only read about in the news, if they were ever made public at all. Naomi's life had always been different from the very beginning. Born in a small town, she grew up in a modest home with parents who taught her discipline, honesty, and courage. Her father had been a veteran, and from him, she learned the value of service and sacrifice. Her mother, though gentle and kind, was equally strong and encouraged Naomi to push beyond limits. From an early age, she stood out, not only because of her intelligence but also because of her determination. As a teenager, Naomi was not the loudest in class, but she was always the most focused. She trained hard in athletics, joining track, martial arts, and even boxing. She had a natural ability to adapt, to remain calm under pressure, and to never give up. Teachers admired her resilience, friends respected her strength, and even those who underestimated her quickly learned that she was someone who couldn't be easily defeated. When she turned 18, Naomi made a choice that would surprise many. Instead of pursuing a traditional career, she enlisted in the military. She wanted to serve her country, to protect others, and to test her own limits. At first, some doubted her. Many thought the military would be too tough for her, that she wouldn't last in such a demanding environment. But Naomi had no interest in proving them wrong with words. She proved them wrong through action. Training was brutal. Days began before sunrise and ended late at night. Soldiers were pushed to their limits both physically and mentally. Some quit, others broke down, but Naomi endured. She carried heavy packs across long distances, learned survival skills in harsh conditions, and mastered weapons with precision. She wasn't the strongest in size, but she was the strongest in spirit. She had a quiet determination that carried her through every obstacle. Her resilience caught the eyes of her superiors. Over time, she was recommended for advanced training, then for elite units. The more challenges they gave her, the more she excelled. She learned strategy, leadership, and intelligence work. Her ability to stay calm in the face of chaos became her greatest weapon. She didn't just follow orders, she inspired those around her to do better. Years passed, and Naomi climbed through the ranks. Eventually, she became part of the Delta Force, one of the most elite special operations units in the world. This was no ordinary assignment. It required secrecy, precision, and unmatched bravery. The missions were dangerous, often carried out in silence, far away from recognition or fame. She led teams into situations where one wrong step could mean disaster, and yet she always found a way to bring her people home safely. Her career was filled with stories of courage, though most of them could never be told publicly. She had been in foreign lands where every moment meant life or death, had stood face to face with danger, and had made decisions that saved countless lives. Yet through it all, she never sought attention or glory. For her, service was about duty, not recognition. And, now standing on that street in plain clothes, she was once again facing a test of patience. The officer who had slapped her had no idea who he was dealing with. He saw only what he assumed, a woman he could intimidate. But behind her calm eyes lay years of experience, discipline, and honor. She could have revealed herself in that moment, shown her ID, or even taken control with her skills. But Naomi chose restraint. Her silence was not weakness. It was strength. She knew that true power didn't always come from reacting. It often came from patience. In her career, she had learned that the greatest victories were sometimes won, not through force, but through wisdom and timing. As the crowd continued to murmur, Naomi thought back to the many times she had been underestimated in her life. She remembered the days when fellow trainees doubted her, when others thought she couldn't survive the challenges of the military. She remembered how each time she had proven them wrong, not by shouting, not by fighting unnecessarily, but by staying focused, disciplined, and unshaken. That day, she was doing the same. She was letting the situation unfold, allowing the truth to eventually reveal itself, because she knew, deep down, that identity and character could not stay hidden forever. Meanwhile, the officer who had struck her was unaware of the storm quietly building around him. People in the crowd were already uploading the video of the slap online. Some had begun searching for the woman's identity, curious about her calmness. The whispers were spreading, and soon the truth would come out. But for Naomi, this wasn't about revenge or proving herself. It was about something larger. She had always believed that respect was not tied to rank or position. Every human being, no matter who they were, deserved dignity. And in that moment, she wasn't thinking about her military honors or her secret missions. She was thinking about the countless others who faced similar disrespect without any recognition or protection. Her silence that day was not just for herself, it was for them too. She was showing that even in the face of injustice, dignity could remain intact. And so she stood there, steady, while her true identity remained hidden. To the officer, she was just another person in the crowd. To the people recording, she was a stranger who had shown unusual courage, but in reality she was something much greater. A commander who had given her life to protecting her nation. A leader who had faced enemies far more dangerous than anything that street could hold. The irony was sharp. Here was a woman who had defended freedom abroad now being disrespected in her own homeland. Yet even then, she chose calm over chaos, patience over retaliation. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing the strength of someone extraordinary. What seemed like an ordinary stop and search was slowly becoming something unforgettable. For Naomi, it was just another test of character. For the officer, it was a mistake he would never forget. And for the crowd, it was the beginning of a story they would soon realize was far bigger than they imagined. The crowd around Naomi continued to grow. People whispered among themselves, shaking their heads at what they had seen. Phones were raised higher, recording every second. The officer who had slapped her tried to act as though he was in control, but inside, he was beginning to feel uneasy. Something about the woman in front of him didn't match the image he had in his head. Most people, after being slapped in public, would shout, cry, or at least argue. But she hadn't done any of that. She stood still, calm, as though nothing could shake her. The silence was powerful. It made the officer nervous. He cleared his throat and repeated his demand for answers. "Tell me where you're going. Who are you really?" he barked. His voice, however, no longer carried the same confidence it had earlier. It was louder but not stronger. He was trying to cover up his own discomfort. Naomi did not answer right away. She looked at him with steady eyes, then slowly reached into her pocket again to show him her identification. She held it in her hand, but she did not hand it over just yet. She wanted to see if he would calm down on his own. The officer, however, grew more impatient. He snatched the ID from her hand and glanced at it quickly. He frowned. The card looked official, but he didn't fully understand what he was looking at. Instead of asking questions, he waved it off as if it didn't matter. "Doesn't change anything," he muttered. "You still have to answer my questions." By now, the crowd was restless. A man near the front spoke loudly. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Why are you treating her like this?" Others nodded in agreement. The officer glared at the man but didn't say anything. Naomi stayed quiet. But inside, she was thinking carefully. She had been in many tense situations before, much more dangerous than this. She knew how quickly things could escalate if she reacted. In her line of work, patience often meant survival. And so, she continued to remain calm, letting the officer dig himself deeper into his own mistake. The officer's partner stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe we should let her go," he whispered. But the officer shook his head, unwilling to admit he was wrong. He crossed his arms and raised his voice again. "Tell me exactly what service you're in," he demanded. Naomi finally spoke, her voice steady but gentle. "I serve in the government, that's all you need to know right now." Her tone was calm, but it carried a kind of weight that silenced the crowd for a moment. It was the kind of voice that came from years of leadership, from someone used to making decisions under pressure. The officer, however, didn't hear the strength behind it. He only heard what he thought was defiance. "You think you're too important to answer me?" he snapped. Naomi didn't respond to the insult. She simply stood with her back straight, her eyes never leaving his. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. People in the crowd started whispering again, but now their whispers had changed. They were no longer just shocked by the slap. They were curious about who she was. "She's too calm," one woman said softly. "She doesn't look scared at all." Another man added, "I've seen her face somewhere. On the news, maybe? Doesn't she work with the military?" The officer heard the murmurs and grew more uncomfortable. His partner shifted nervously again, clearly wishing the ground would swallow them both, but Naomi remained steady. She had faced far worse than public humiliation. This was nothing compared to the nights she had spent in dangerous territories, leading teams of soldiers under the pressure of life and death decisions. She remembered one mission where she had to remain still for hours waiting for the right moment to move, while chaos unfolded all around. She remembered how silence had saved lives then. That same silence was now guiding her in this moment. One of the younger bystanders, holding his phone high, suddenly spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I think I know who she is. Isn't she Commander Carter? I saw her picture in an article last month about military heroes." The officer froze. His face turned pale and he turned to look at Naomi more carefully. For the first time, he noticed the small but important details he had ignored before. The posture, the discipline in her movements, the controlled breathing. These were not traits of an ordinary citizen. The crowd erupted with whispers. "Commander Carter? Delta Force? Is that really her?" Naomi still didn't confirm it. She simply stood quietly, letting the weight of their words fill the air. She didn't need to boast. She didn't need to reveal her achievements. If people recognized her, that was their conclusion to make. The officer's hands trembled slightly as he held her ID again, looking at it more closely this time. His eyes widened when he finally understood the symbols and clearances on the card. He had slapped not just a citizen, but a decorated commander of one of the most elite military forces in the world. His stomach dropped as the reality hit him. He tried to recover, clearing his throat again. "Why didn't you say that earlier?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. Naomi looked at him calmly and said, "Because it shouldn't matter." The crowd fell silent at her words. The truth of her statement hung in the air. She was right. No one should be treated with disrespect, commander or not. The officer's partner finally stepped forward, gently pulling the officer back. "That's enough," he whispered firmly. His face was pale too, but he still had the sense to realize they needed to stop before things got worse. By now, several in the crowd had confirmed her identity through quick searches on their phones. Pictures of her in uniform appeared, showing her medals and honors. The whispers turned into quiet admiration. People looked at her with new eyes, realizing the strength behind her calm presence. But Naomi remained unchanged. She didn't puff her chest with pride. She didn't scold the officer or raise her voice. She stood exactly as she had before, steady, calm, and dignified. For her, this wasn't about proving her power. It was about proving a point much larger than herself. The officer who had slapped her lowered his head, unsure of what to do. He knew his career might already be in danger. The crowd had seen everything. The recordings were spreading fast. But Naomi didn't gloat. She simply let the silence linger, allowing the weight of the moment to teach its own lesson. For the bystanders, it was a moment they would never forget. They had come expecting just another stop and search, but instead, they had witnessed a powerful reminder of how wrong assumptions could be. And though Naomi still hadn't revealed everything, her composure and dignity told them all they needed to know. She was no ordinary woman. The incident was far from over. Higher authorities would soon arrive and the truth would come out in full. But in that moment on that crowded street, Naomi's quiet strength spoke louder than any uniform or title could. The air on that street was heavy. The officer who had slapped Naomi felt as if the ground beneath his feet was shaking. His partner looked down, avoiding the eyes of the crowd. People whispered louder, some pointing at their phones as they confirmed her identity. Naomi Carter, a name that was not unknown anymore. Pictures of her in uniform, decorated with medals, were already being compared to the woman standing silently in front of them. The resemblance was undeniable. Naomi herself did not move. She stood there with the same calmness she had held since the beginning. For her, the situation was no longer about the sting on her cheek. It had become a test of how she would handle being publicly disrespected in a place where she should have felt safe. She could have ended it earlier by showing her full credentials, by revealing her rank and demanding respect. But she had chosen not to. She had chosen to let the moment play out because she wanted to make a point much larger than herself. The sound of sirens soon broke through the tension. A black police car pulled up quickly, and from it stepped a higher-ranking officer. He was an older man, his uniform neat, his posture strict. He walked with purpose, his eyes immediately scanning the scene. The crowd parted slightly as he approached. People whispered his name, recognizing him as a precinct commander. "What is going on here?" he demanded firmly, his voice carrying authority. The officer who had slapped Naomi opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out. His throat felt dry. His partner, realizing the danger of silence, spoke instead. "Routine stop and search, sir," he explained quickly. Things became complicated. The commander's eyes moved to Naomi. For a moment, he seemed unsure of who she was, but then he caught sight of the ID still in the younger officer's trembling hand. He took it, examined it carefully, and his face changed instantly. His eyes widened and his mouth opened slightly in disbelief. He looked from the ID to Naomi and back again, before finally straightening his posture. "Commander Carter?" he said softly, almost to himself, but loud enough that the crowd heard. The whispers grew stronger. Some people gasped, others nodded, realizing their guesses had been right. Phones shook in hands as people tried to capture the moment. The officer, who had slapped her, turned pale. His heart pounded in his chest and sweat began to form on his forehead. He had heard the name before. He remembered stories told in quiet voices about a commander who had led some of the most dangerous missions in modern times. He remembered reading an article about her bravery, about how she had saved her team in a mission overseas. And now, he realized with growing horror that the person he had struck was that same woman. Naomi finally spoke, her voice calm but steady. "Yes," she said simply, acknowledging her identity. The precinct commander immediately turned to the officer. His face hardened with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed. His voice was low but sharp, the kind of tone that cut deeper than shouting. The officer stammered, I didn't know. I didn't realize who she—" "It doesn't matter if you knew," the commander snapped. "Respect is not given based on title. It is given because every citizen deserves it." The crowd erupted in agreement, clapping, nodding, murmuring words of support. Naomi, however, did not gloat. She simply lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked back up with the same quiet strength she had carried all along. The precinct commander turned back to her, his expression now softened. "Commander, I deeply apologize for this incident. This is unacceptable." He placed his hand on his chest, almost as if trying to show sincerity. "I assure you, immediate action will be taken." Naomi nodded lightly. "Thank you," she replied. Her tone was polite, but her eyes revealed something more. She wasn't interested in apologies. She wanted change. The crowd began to shout words of encouragement toward her. "We support you, ma'am," someone called. Another person shouted, "This should never happen to anyone." Their voices rose together, echoing through the street. The officer who had slapped her hung his head low, unable to look at anyone. He felt as though the weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders. His career, his reputation, everything he had built now rested on a single moment of impatience and prejudice. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She could see the fear and regret in his eyes. She could see how his confidence had crumbled. But instead of speaking harshly, she said something unexpected. "I don't need you to respect me because of my rank," she said softly. "I need you to respect people because it is the right thing to do." Her words struck deeply, not just the officer but everyone present. The crowd grew silent, listening intently. The precinct commander cleared his throat, addressing the people around them. "This incident will be investigated immediately. Justice will be served." His voice was loud, clear, and carried authority. But Naomi's words carried a different kind of authority, the authority of truth. People nodded, their eyes fixed on her. They realized they weren't just looking at a decorated commander. They were looking at a leader who understood dignity, fairness, and respect at the deepest level. A woman in the crowd whispered to her daughter, "Do you see? That's strength. Not just medals or uniforms. That's real strength." The little girl nodded, her eyes wide with admiration. The scene slowly began to settle as the higher authorities took over. Reports were written, statements were taken, and the crowd eventually began to disperse. Yet, even as people walked away, they kept talking about what they had seen. Phones buzzed with notifications as videos of the incident spread online. The world beyond that street was beginning to hear the story. Naomi, however, remained composed. She had no interest in fame or recognition. What mattered to her was that a lesson had been given, not just to the officer but to everyone watching. She had turned a moment of disrespect into a reminder of human dignity. As the precinct commander escorted her away from the scene, he spoke quietly. "You handled this with more patience than most would have, Commander. I don't know how to thank you for your restraint." Naomi glanced at him and said, "You don't need to thank me. Just make sure your officers learn from this. That will be thanks enough." The commander nodded, humbled by her words. He knew they carried a responsibility far greater than any apology. Meanwhile, the officer who had struck her stood silently, watching her leave. His chest felt heavy, his mind filled with regret. He realized that in his impatience, he had not only disrespected a citizen, but also shamed himself in front of the world. He had a long road ahead, filled with accountability and reflection. For Naomi, the moment was another chapter in a life already full of challenges. But this one was different. It wasn't about combat, strategy, or survival. It was about teaching respect without ever raising her voice. It was about showing strength through silence and patience through pain. And so, as she walked away from the scene, her footsteps steady, the crowd's whispers followed her. Some called her a hero. Some called her an inspiration. But Naomi didn't focus on the titles. She focused on the lesson, the one she hoped would last long after the video stopped trending and the headlines faded. She had faced enemies abroad, but now she had faced a different kind of battle at home. And once again, she had walked away undefeated. After the incident on the street, Naomi Carter took a deep breath and continued her walk. The day was no longer just another ordinary visit. Every step she took seemed to echo with the lessons she had just imparted, not only to the officer and the crowd but to herself as well. Even in moments of unexpected disrespect, she had maintained control, patience, and dignity. This was something she wanted everyone to understand. True strength was shown not through anger, but through composure and wisdom. The videos of the incident had spread rapidly online. Within hours, people all over the city, and even across the country, were talking about it. Many were shocked by the behavior of the officer, but even more were inspired by Naomi's reaction. Comment sections filled with admiration for her calmness, courage, and restraint. People called her an example of how dignity could shine even in difficult circumstances. She did not watch the online reactions herself. She didn't need validation. What mattered to her was that a conversation about respect had begun. Back at the precinct, the officers involved were facing serious questions. The slap, captured clearly on video, was now evidence of misconduct. The higher authorities were determined to act quickly, knowing that this incident could set a precedent. The officer who had struck Naomi was called in for a formal inquiry. He was nervous, his pride crushed, and he had time to reflect on his actions. He realized that his assumptions, his impatience, and his lack of understanding had led to this public humiliation. He was confronted not just by rules, but by the undeniable fact that he had disrespected someone who had devoted her life to service. Naomi, meanwhile, returned to her own life quietly. She went back to her home, which was modest and calm. For someone who had faced dangerous missions, high-pressure situations, and life-threatening challenges, returning home was a comfort. But she knew that the street incident had left a mark, not on her, but on the way people thought about respect, assumptions, and human dignity. She felt that her reaction had turned a small act of injustice into a broader lesson for everyone. The news media picked up the story. Articles described Naomi as a decorated Delta Force commander, a hero who had faced far more extreme situations than a slap on the street could ever compare to. Many articles highlighted her restraint, her calmness, and her choice to teach a lesson without using force. Headlines praised her not only for her military achievements but also for her moral courage. While others might have reacted with anger, retaliation, or confrontation, Naomi had chosen a path of patience and wisdom. Across the city, the community began to talk. People discussed the incident in schools, offices, and homes. Some debated the misuse of authority by the officer, while others spoke about the importance of treating every individual with respect. Naomi's example became a quiet inspiration for many, showing that leadership is not just about power or rank, but about integrity, humility, and patience. Parents shared the story with their children, teaching them that dignity is something that should never be compromised, no matter the situation. Even within the military, Naomi's colleagues recognized the significance of the incident. They admired her ability to remain composed in public while carrying the weight of her identity and achievements privately. For many young soldiers and officers, this was a lesson in leadership. Real power is often shown not in confrontation, but in calmness, foresight, and self-control. Naomi's actions had reminded them that respect and honor are not just earned in battle, but also in everyday interactions. For Naomi herself, the incident was a reminder of why she had chosen the path she did. From the beginning of her career, she had understood that service meant responsibility, not only in missions abroad, but also in setting an example for the world around her. Every choice she made, whether in a war zone or on a city street, reflected her commitment to that principle. And even though she had been underestimated by the officer, she had used that moment to reinforce a simple but powerful truth. Appearances can deceive, and every individual deserves dignity and respect. The officer involved faced serious consequences. Internal investigations and disciplinary actions were carried out swiftly. He had to attend sensitivity training, reflect on his behavior, and acknowledge the mistake he had made. While it was a difficult experience for him, it also became a turning point. He began to understand that respect is not given based on assumptions, stereotypes, or appearances. It is owed to every human being, regardless of their identity. The lesson was harsh but meaningful. Naomi herself avoided using the incident for personal gain. She did not seek interviews, awards, or public recognition. Her focus was always on the broader lesson. She wanted the world to see that dignity, patience, and wisdom are more powerful than anger or aggression. Her example became a model for behavior, showing that courage is not always shown through confrontation, but often through restraint, calmness, and moral strength. In schools and community centers, teachers shared Naomi's story to encourage discussions about fairness, respect, and understanding. Children learned that it is important to remain calm in difficult situations and that standing with dignity often teaches more than responding with anger. Communities began emphasizing respectful behavior, inspired by the example of someone who had faced extreme challenges with grace and restraint. Even in the days that followed, Naomi's story continued to inspire. Social media posts highlighted the incident as a case study in leadership and moral courage. Videos of her calm stance circulated widely, not to glorify the slap she endured, but to celebrate her response. She became a symbol of integrity, a reminder that actions rooted in patience and understanding can have a profound impact on society. For Naomi personally, the experience reinforced the values she had lived by for years. She reflected on the importance of humility, composure, and moral clarity. Even after all her missions, all her accomplishments, and all her leadership roles, she understood that her greatest contribution was not in medals or honors, but in demonstrating that respect and dignity are universal principles. As time passed, the officer involved worked to rebuild his reputation. He acknowledged his mistake publicly and committed to being more aware of his actions and the assumptions he made about others. The precinct instituted new training to ensure that similar incidents would not occur in the future. Naomi's presence, though quiet, had sparked change. Her example had rippled through the community, the department, and the wider public, teaching lessons that extended far beyond that single street. And so, the story of that day remained a powerful reminder for everyone who heard it. A woman, calm and dignified, had faced disrespect and turned it into a lesson for all. A commander who had risked her life countless times overseas had shown that courage is not only about physical bravery, but also about moral strength. Her actions inspired change, reflection, and understanding in ways that no force could have achieved. Naomi's cheek healed, and the sting faded, but the impact of her reaction did not. She continued her life quietly, focusing on her work and her responsibilities, but the story of her restraint and dignity continued to spread. People remembered it not because of the slap itself, but because of how she responded. In a world that often rewards aggression or arrogance, Naomi's example stood as proof that patience, respect, and wisdom are the true measures of strength. In the end, the incident became more than a public confrontation. It became a lesson in humanity. It reminded everyone that no matter who you are, everyone deserves respect. It showed that calmness in the face of provocation can inspire change, and that true leadership is about action rooted in principle, not power. Naomi Carter, without a word of retaliation, had turned an ordinary day into an extraordinary moment of teaching and inspiration. Her story spread far and wide, reaching people who had never heard of Delta Force or her military achievements. They saw in her an example of how dignity and patience could make a difference, even when faced with injustice. And quietly, without seeking attention or recognition, Naomi continued her life, satisfied that she had turned a moment of disrespect into a lasting lesson for everyone who witnessed it. The city was alive with its usual noise, cars honking, vendors calling out to customers, and people rushing to work. In the middle of this busy street walked a woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. She was dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, her hair tied back neatly. To most people, she looked like any ordinary person moving through the day. She had no fancy jewelry, no official uniform, and nothing that gave away who she really was. As she crossed the street, she noticed a group of police officers stopping people for random checks. They stood near the corner, waving at pedestrians, asking for identification and bags to be opened. It was something common in the city, though people often found it uncomfortable. When one officer's eyes fell on her, he motioned with his hand for her to stop. She obeyed calmly, stepping aside while others walked past. "Excuse me, miss." "Step over here," the officer said, his voice firm. She nodded and moved closer, handing him her small bag when he asked. He opened it, searched inside quickly, and found nothing unusual, just a wallet, a phone, and a few personal items. Still, his eyes narrowed as if he wasn't satisfied. "What are you doing in this area?" he asked. His tone wasn't friendly, and it carried a hint of suspicion. "I'm on my way to visit family," she replied politely. Her voice was calm, steady, and respectful, but the officer seemed unimpressed. He asked for her ID and she reached into her pocket slowly, handing it over. He studied it, then looked back at her as if something about her didn't sit right. People nearby had started to notice the exchange. Some slowed down, curious, while others kept moving quickly, not wanting to get involved. "Where do you work?" he demanded. She smiled faintly. "I'm in the service." The officer raised his eyebrow. "What service?" She paused for a moment, not answering right away. She didn't want to reveal too much about herself, and she believed there was no need. It was a routine stop after all, nothing serious. "Government service," she said simply. The officer's impatience grew. His voice became sharper and he started repeating his questions more aggressively, as if her calmness annoyed him. "Don't play smart with me. What exactly do you do? Why are you here? Who are you meeting?" She kept her composure, answering, with the same politeness, but his frustration only increased. His partner, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, sensing that things were going further than they should. Yet the officer pressing her didn't stop. "Look at me when I'm talking. To you?" he barked. She raised her eyes slowly, her expression still steady, showing neither fear nor anger. Her calmness somehow made the officer feel challenged. And then, in a moment that shocked everyone present, he lost control. With an open hand, he slapped her across the cheek. The sound was sharp, cutting through the noise of the busy street. People gasped. A few froze where they stood, staring in disbelief. Others quickly pulled out their phones, recording what had just happened. The officer's action was sudden and unnecessary, and it left the air heavy with silence for a few seconds. The woman didn't stumble. She didn't react with anger or raise her voice. She simply placed her hand gently against her cheek and looked straight at him. Her eyes were calm, not weak but filled with a quiet strength that unsettled the officer even more. The crowd began to murmur. Some whispered about the slap, while others wondered why she didn't fight back. A few shook their heads in disapproval, muttering that the officer had gone too far. The officer, realizing that people were watching and recording, tried to speak with authority. "This is procedure. Cooperate or it will get worse for you," he said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. His partner looked uneasy, shifting from one foot to another, clearly aware that the situation had crossed a line. The woman, however, did not argue. She didn't raise her hand or speak harshly. Instead, she stood silently, her presence commanding respect in a way the crowd couldn't quite understand. Her silence felt powerful, almost heavier than words. A man from the crowd spoke up. "You didn't need to hit her. She was cooperating." His voice was firm and a few others nodded in agreement. The officer glanced at the crowd nervously, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control. Still, the woman remained composed. She didn't reveal who she was. She didn't mention her position, her training, or her authority. To everyone else, she looked like just another citizen facing unfair treatment. And yet, there was something about the way she carried herself, the calm in her eyes, the steadiness in her breathing, that made people sense she was not ordinary. The slap was more than just a physical act. It was a moment that revealed a larger truth about assumptions and prejudice. The officer had judged her by appearance, never imagining that behind her plain clothes stood someone who had faced far greater challenges than he could ever imagine. The scene grew heavier as more people gathered, whispering among themselves. Some began to film more openly, holding their phones higher to capture everything. The officer's face tightened with frustration, but deep inside, he began to feel uneasy. Something about her silence and the way the crowd was reacting made him realize this incident was not going to disappear quietly. For the woman, however, the moment was just another test of patience. She had faced situations where lives depended on her decisions, where chaos surrounded her and danger was constant. Compared to that, this was minor, though it carried its own weight. She knew her identity could change everything instantly, but she chose restraint. She chose silence. And so, the first chapter of that day's story ended not with shouting or retaliation, but with a quiet, unshaken dignity. She stood still, her cheek stinging from the slap, but her spirit untouched. Neither the officer, nor the crowd, nor anyone passing by could yet imagine who she really was and what kind of power and responsibility she carried. What none of them knew at that moment was that this ordinary-looking woman was no ordinary citizen. Behind her quiet eyes and simple clothes was a commander who had led some of the most elite soldiers in the world. She had faced dangers far beyond the imagination of anyone on that street. And yet, in that moment, she allowed herself to be just another person in the crowd, calm, patient, and strong.